All right, diving deeper today into something, well, something many of us wrestle with. How do you genuinely prove your impact isn't just widespread, but truly transformative across completely different fields? I mean, it's not enough to just say you're multidisciplinary, is it?
That's a really crucial distinction. Um, Traditional metrics often confine influence to these narrow silos, but the real world and real innovation, it thrives at those intersections. This deep dive introduces a rigorous framework that actually lets you demonstrably show profound, shaping influence across multiple distinct knowledge domains.
Absolutely. And this isn't just about, listing achievements. It's more like a strategic blueprint for proving you or maybe your team or your whole organization are a genuine leader, a true change maker, not just an observer on the sidelines. Our mission today is really to cut through the complexity and arm you with this idea of plural domain dominance and the multi-vector analysis toolkit. It's kind of your shortcut to powerfully articulating impact, even to the toughest critics.
Exactly. We're moving beyond just presence. We're talking about active, undeniable shaping of those domains.
Okay. So this idea of plural domain dominance, it sounds incredibly powerful, almost intimidating. What's the core claim here, really? And how is it different from just being, versatile or multidisciplinary?
Okay, the core claim is that an actor, and look, that could be an individual researcher, a whole research group, a center, even an entire program, exerts dominant influence across multiple, clearly distinct knowledge domains, which naturally raises an important question. What's the fundamental difference between simply working in various fields and genuinely, well, dominating them?
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. It's not about being multidisciplinary, which is kind of like working in parallel across different domains, right, side by side. Nor is it just interdisciplinary integration, where you're maybe synthesizing insights from different fields. Dominance, as this framework defines it, means you are actively reshaping those domains. You're changing their canon, their methods, maybe even their very language.
Spot on. And we also need to distinguish between breadth, just the sheer number of domains you touch, and depth, the intensity, the sort of foundational nature of your influence within each specific domain. And maybe whether your influence is direct, through things like citations or leadership, or perhaps more indirect by shifting methodological norms or the conceptual frameworks that fields use.
Okay, so to even begin measuring this kind of profound influence, we need some common ground, some fundamental definitions. What are the key ontological primitives, the sort of basic building blocks that make up this analysis?
Yeah, you've got it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, these are the fundamental components we really need to define clearly. First, you have the actor. That's the entity being analyzed. Could be an individual, a lab, a whole institute. Then there's the domain. Essentially, that's a bounded epistemic community,
Yeah.
which is just a way of saying a specific discipline, maybe a subdiscipline, or even a practice area. And crucially, each domain has its own established canon, methods, venues, and language.
Got it. So it's the who, the actor, and the where, the domain. What else is essential here? What other pieces complete the puzzle?
Well, we also need to consider their output. These are the tangible things like publications, patents, software, maybe policy texts. Then the vectors through which influence is exerted, think channels like knowledge production or policy uptake. And the relations that show that influence things like adoption of ideas, citation, co-authorship. And finally, there's temporal context. Are we looking at episodic influence or something sustained over time? And scale scope is the reach local, national, or international.
Okay, let's unpack this next bit. This framework gives us 10 canonical vectors. I kind of like thinking of them as 10 distinct channels or maybe even superpowers through which you can exert influence. What are some of the most compelling ones, the ones that really stand out?
Yeah, treating each of these vectors as a sort of first-class dimension of influence is key. Let's look at a couple. One, knowledge production, scholarly output. This is your traditional publishing power, right? But we're looking for specific evidence, like field-tagged publications across domains, articles in genuinely cross-domain journals, or maybe invited reviews and books that are clearly designed to bridge fields. Two, citation and intellectual centrality. Now, this isn't just about how much you're cited, but crucially where. Cross-domain citations are gold here. And there's a concept called betweenness centrality in citation networks.
Betweenness centrality.
Yeah, it shows how often your work acts as a necessary bridge between other separate bodies of knowledge.
That's fascinating. Being a bridge is a great way to think about that central influence. What about more practical applications outside of pure scholarship?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That leads us to number 3, methodological transfer. This is all about methods you developed, maybe in one domain, being picked up and used effectively in others. The evidence. Well, you'd look for references to your method in the method sections of papers and other fields, or tutorials on your method popping up, or even, forks or stars on code repositories if it's software. 4, institutional authority. This is about building the actual structures that enable interdisciplinary work. Think founding centers, holding cross-departmental appointments, leadership roles in interdisciplinary societies. You're building the infrastructure. And 5, policy and societal impact. This demonstrates real-world change. Here we look for citations in government reports, documented advisory roles, public reports that actively shape multiple sectors.
Wow. So what this really means for someone listening, someone looking to show their broad impact, it's clearly not just about publishing papers. It's about everything from creating new tools people use to literally changing policy outcomes.
Precisely. And the other 5 vectors really round this out. There's funding and resource control. Are you bringing in those big multi-domain grants? Educational footprint. Are your ideas showing up in courses across different departments? Are you writing the textbooks? Translation and technology. Think patents, software licenses, things being used in industry. Community formation. Maybe you started a new conference or a journal that brings different groups together. And finally, rhetorical and cultural presence. Are you getting keynote invites across different fields? Are your ideas being discussed in the media? Each one has specific, measurable evidence tied to it.
Okay, this all sounds incredibly thorough, really powerful in theory. But how do you actually measure these things? How do you go from a concept like, say, rhetorical presence to actual hard data that's convincing?
Right, this is where operationalization becomes absolutely critical. For each vector you've chosen to focus on, you'd select, say, 2 to 4 specific indicators. You need a balanced quantitative metrics, things you can count, paired with qualitative evidence for context. So, for example, knowledge production. You might actually count publications with multiple domain tags from a database like Scopus or Web of Science. Or you could look at the proportion of your outputs co-authored with researchers from clearly different domains.
Okay, so for something like methodological transfer, you're not just saying, oh, my method is popular. You're tracking specific, verifiable evidence of its adoption.
It's exactly right. For methodological transfer, you'd be meticulously looking for explicit references to your specific method in the method sections of papers clearly outside its original domain. Or maybe you'd count the number of people from other fields attending workshops you run on that method. For policy impact, you'd track down those citations in government reports or find evidence of adopted policy briefs that use your work. The crucial step, always, is to rigorously document the operational definition for each indicator, the specific data source, the time window you're looking at, and really importantly, the field normalization approach you use for comparison. Okay, so once you have your data, all meticulously collected, a range of analytical methods help you actually interpret it, which raises an important question. How do you weave all this potentially disparate data together to tell a coherent story of influence?
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. We're talking about some powerful tools here. On the quantitative side, you mentioned things like bibliometrics and network analysis. So you're mapping connections, right? Showing how your work links different research clusters.
Exactly. We can show that between modest centrality, we talked about how you act as a bridge, or even demonstrate modularity reduction, which basically means your work helps break down the typical silos between research communities. We also use text topic modeling. Think of algorithms that can read vast amounts of text and identify if the core concepts or language from your work are appearing and spreading across different domains.
So it's like tracking the intellectual DNA spreading across fields.
Kinda, yeah. And then there's temporal analysis to map adoption timelines, showing when ideas move from origin to diffusion, maybe even to institutionalization. And multiplex network analysis is really neat. It lets us stack different networks like co-authorship, citations, funding, all on top of each other to find actors who are influential across multiple layers of interaction at once.
But it's not all just numbers and networks, right? You need the why and the how behind those connections.
Precisely. That's where qualitative case synthesis is vital. Using things like expert interviews, maybe field notes, detailed document analysis. This tells us the story of how that influence actually happened. And for an overall picture, composite scoring allows you to carefully normalize, weight, and then aggregate all these different vector scores into a single plural domain dominance index. Though you'd always use sensitivity analysis to check how robust that index is. And finally, validation is critical, cross-referencing quantitative signals with qualitative evidence, maybe getting expert panels involved.
Okay, so let's say you've done all this work. You've collected the data, run the analyses, synthesized everything. Now, how do you actually stand up and confidently declare that you or your group has achieved plural domain dominance? What are the rules of engagement, the criteria for making a claim that's actually defensible?
Yeah, defensible is the key word there. These claims have to be defensible, they need to be reproducible, and importantly, they need to be comparative. There's several strategies you could use. One is aiming for a relative benchmark. You show you're in the top, say, 5% or 10% among a well-defined group of comparable actors based on that composite index we talked about. Compare yourself to your peers. Or you could use cross-domain thresholding. Here, you demonstrate that you exceed specific recognized thresholds within multiple distinct domains simultaneously, like being in the top 10% citation percentile in 3 or more different fields.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. So it's not just about one single impressive number, but proving a consistent pattern of high-level performance across multiple distinct areas. That feels much more robust.
Exactly. Other strategies could include demonstrating sustained cross-domain leadership, showing significant impact across, say, at least 5 years and maybe 3 different vectors, with one ideally being institutional or maybe pedagogical, or providing clear adoption proof where your methods or tools are demonstrably being used by actors in multiple domains, measured maybe by citations, software forks, course adoptions, things like that. And finally, for real rigor, a triangulated bundle for each domain you're claiming. This combines those hard bibliometric numbers with at least one solid piece of qualitative corroboration, like documented policy use or a strong testimonial from an expert in that field.
This whole framework sounds incredibly robust, almost bulletproof. But, even the best systems can have potential tripwires. What are some common pitfalls people might encounter when they try to actually do this, when they try to prove plural domain dominance, and how do you navigate them?
That's a really important question. How do we ensure the measurements are fair and accurate, right? A very common one is that field citation habits differ just massively across disciplines. A really impactful paper in pure math might get far fewer raw citations than an average paper in a field like molecular biology. So the mitigation is crucial. Use field normalized metrics. These adjust the citation counts to account for the average rates within those specific fields, basically leveling the playing field before you compare across them.
That makes total sense. You absolutely can't compare raw citation counts across fields like mathematics and medicine. It's apples and oranges. What else should people watch out for?
Another big one is name ambiguity homonyms. You got to make sure you're actually tracking the right actor, the right person or group. This is mitigated by careful disambiguation using things like ORCD identifiers, maybe confirmed email addresses, or specific institutional affiliations. Get the identity right. You also need to be wary of gaming and survivorship bias. People might try to game the metrics, or maybe only the successful initiatives survive to be measured. You mitigate this by triangulating, always combining quantitative signals with qualitative evidence and looking at those temporal patterns for sustained impact. And crucially, remember that overaggregation hides nuance. Just presenting a single composite score isn't enough. You should always show the raw vector profiles too, so people can see the full, detailed picture of influence. Transparency is key.
Right, that makes sense. You need the detail, not just the headline number.
And sometimes, for smaller fields, you might lean more on qualitative proof simply because the quantitative data is thinner.
So, putting this all together, what does this all mean for someone wanting to put this into action? What's the practical workflow look like? How do you go from just the idea of broad impact to a full defensible claim of dominance?
It really is a structured journey. You typically start with a scoping memo. This is where you nail down who's the actor, what are the domains, what exactly are we claiming, and who are the stakeholders. Get that clear up front. Then you develop an ontology and measurement plan. This details your chosen vectors, the specific indicators you'll use for each, your data sources, the time window, all the specifics. Next comes data collection and cleaning. This is the heavy lifting, gathering all the bibliometrics, policy docs, institutional records, whatever you need, and being super careful with disambiguation, making sure the data is accurate.
Okay, and then you get into the analysis itself.
Yes, exactly. You develop an analytic pipeline. This might involve scripts for the network analysis, the topic modeling, the composite scoring, making it systematic and reproducible. This all leads towards validation, maybe through expert interviews, maybe external peer review, to really kick the tires on your findings. And the ultimate deliverables, usually a comprehensive report, maybe an executive dashboard for quick overview, and crucially, those meticulously organized evidence bundles for each domain you're claiming dominance in. And throughout all of this, ensuring reproducibility perhaps by sharing code and anonymized data where possible is paramount for credibility.
So let's bring this home. What does this all mean for you, our listener? You might not be, writing a complex impact report tomorrow, but why should this framework, this way of thinking, matter to you?
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just some academic exercise. I mean, this framework provides a really valuable toolkit for anyone, maybe an entrepreneur launching products across different sectors, a nonprofit trying to show deep policy influence, or honestly, even just someone trying to understand and articulate their own diverse impact. It really emphasizes active engagement, things like interdisciplinary collaboration, pursuing methodological diversity, focusing on knowledge translation into practice, and genuine stakeholder engagement. These aren't just analytical points in the framework, they're the concrete actions that achieve this kind of broad shaping influence. The framework gives you a map for how to actually do it.
It really helps you move beyond just, listing your accomplishments on a CV to truly demonstrating your unique value proposition and the profound, maybe even unexpected impact you're having across different worlds. It's about being much more deliberate, more strategic in your influence, not just hoping it happens or struggling to explain it after the fact. And that pretty much wraps up our deep dive today into plural domain dominance and multi-vector analysis. We've really unpacked the core concepts, explored those 10 channels or vectors of influence, looked at how you actually measure it, and even how you can declare it robustly.
What's fascinating here, I think, is that this structured approach allows for a level of clarity and, importantly, defensibility in demonstrating interdisciplinary leadership that's often missing. It really helps you articulate not just what you do, but how you genuinely shape the world around you. It provides that compelling narrative.
So, what does this all mean for you listening? Maybe next time you think about your work or a project you're involved in, ask yourself, where are you not just present, but truly shaping a domain? What new connections, what hidden influence could you reveal about your own impact if you started looking through this multi-vector lens? It could be a really powerful way to reevaluate your own strategic value.
Keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep connecting those dots across domains.
Until next time, keep